So let's go back to our demo involving the garage door opener. Here are the curves that you saw earlier. So earlier, we showed you this input. The input is in pink. And I'm also showing you the output. The output is in yellow. The IV curve shown here is the curve of the little device, the nonlinear device that we have. And this shows you the region of the curve that's articulated by this input as shown. So right now, I have a pretty large input. And this is the input in pink again. And notice that the output is highly distorted. Okay, it looks okay at the upper ends of it, but on the negative going excursions, it looks pretty distorted. So this is the same as what you saw earlier, no surprises here. Okay, so now we looked at the technique of the small signal method, and in that method, we talked about two things. We talked about boost and shrink. The idea was that we could try to get our input signal, in pink here, to articulate a region of the curve of the nonlinear device that was more or less linear. And we did that by boosting the signal to a region of the curve that was more interesting up here, and making the signal smaller so that we articulated a small region of the curve, thereby getting a linear response. Okay, so let's get right down to it. And let me start by boosting the input signal by adding a DC offset to it. So watch the pink curve carefully. As I add the DC offset to it, notice that the pink curve is going to rise higher and higher because of the DC offset. At the same time, you will notice that the region of the IV curve of the device that will be articulated will also be increasing more and more in the positive direction of the voltage. Okay, so let's get right down to it, and let me increase the DC offset. Okay, notice right here, the pink curve is moving higher as I increase the voltage applied across it. Okay, so notice that I have applied about a volt of offset to the pink input curve, and that has gone up by about a volt. And notice that the region of the nonlinear curve that's articulated is more on the positive side of the voltage here. But notice that the output is still distorted. Okay, the output is still distorted. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to shrink my input voltage, okay, according to boost and shrink. Okay, and when I shrink, you will see something absolutely spectacular happen. Okay, so get prepared for your next big aha moment in 6002X. Okay, as I said earlier, we're going to see a few aha moments. One was the amazing magic of the static discipline and the digital abstraction. This is another big one. Okay, as I make the pink curve smaller, just watch what happens to the yellow curve, and that will be your next big aha moment. And that will really show you how amazing the small signal technique is. Okay, watch and see. I'm reducing the pink curve, making it smaller and smaller, and look at that. Isn't that spectacular? Okay, I just reduced my input voltage from about 200 millivolts to about 50 millivolts by about a factor of 4. Okay, so this is my input curve now. It is both boosted up by about a volt or two, and it has also been made smaller to about 50 millivolts. And notice that the output is more or less a sinusoid and corresponds pretty nicely to the input. Also notice that the part of the nonlinear curve articulated by the small signal input also looks more or less like a straight line. Okay? Now, just to show you that this is all indeed true, let me just go backwards and convince you that I do get distortion when I take off the offset. So I'm going to take off the offset now. And notice that I'm taking away the offset, so my pink curve goes down. And I'm going to increase the input. Okay, I'm going to increase the input. So notice that the output is highly distorted again. Okay, now what I'll do is I'm going to boost the input again to a higher voltage and reduce the size of the input, and notice that I get back a nice linear response again. So there you have it. That's the beauty and the magic of the small signal method. So before we wrap up this little demo, let me show you what it sounds like. So let me start inputting some music next and show you the same things, but this time around with music. So let's move up to a little player here and start inputting some music and see how that sounds. So let me start by getting some music going. Let's go. So let's go back to the screen here of the scope. Notice that here's my input. in pink as usual. And the output here, there's hardly any output. And the reason is that I'm articulating the flat portion of the curve that is really, really quite uninteresting. So there's hardly any sound being transmitted over my light beam of the garage door opener. And what little sound is there is highly distorted. So I'll let you listen to the distorted sound for a second without my voice damping it out for you. Okay, so that's a distorted sound and there's hardly any volume there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to gradually add a DC offset to the input. And as I add a DC offset to the input, notice that you will get a different part of the IV curve of the nonlinear device exercised. And hopefully as I add more DC offset and as I shrink the input signal, you will hear a much clearer response and a response that is audible now from at the output. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to add a DC offset. Okay, watch the